All right, you're recording.
We are recording. All right, I will call the Land Use Review Board meeting of March 2nd, 2026 to order. Sarah Had present. Brooke?
Dingledine present.
Kirsten?
Sorry, Kirsten Sultan present.
And Alex. Alex is joining us. He might have some connectivity issues. We can come back to him. Janet Hurley's absent, so I will be as vice chair running the meeting today. And I will ask for any agenda updates. I do have one, which is under G, the Mount Scottney Regional Planning Commission designated board member. I think I'd also like to add Addison County designated board as a subsection of something else that we need to tackle today. Does anybody else have any other agenda modifications? All right, hearing none. Opportunity for public comments on non-agenda items. Does not look like we have anybody joining us in Essex. And I don't see anybody else joining us online besides board and staff. We can come back to that. I'll move on to consent agenda items. The minutes of February 17th and 19th. Has everybody had a chance to review? Okay. Kirsten.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 17th and 19th with any edits as discussed here. I don't myself believe that I've received any edits from board members, but perhaps they'll be identified now.
All right, Brooke.
Second the motion, and I did not have any specific edits to the minutes.
All right, nice work, team. There are no other questions or comments or corrections. I'll take a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And no abstentions. I see we lost Alex. I think hopefully he'll come back, but that was unanimous for the three of us. I'll move on to item E, notice of alleged violation delegation. Jenny, are you joining us?
Yes, everyone. I almost said yes, Your Honor, which I suppose is also technically appropriate and happy to do so. The board, there is a memo an attorney-client privileged memo in the executive session file. The short version of the ask again is that the legal and enforcement teams are asking the board to delegate its authority to issue notices of alleged violation under Chapter 201 of Title 10 to the team, specifically identifying that other forms of enforcement would still require full approval from the board, and that NOAVs in and of themselves do not leverage penalties or have any kind of impact on future calculations of penalties or concerns. Like, it doesn't count as a strike against someone. It begins the correspondence between our enforcement team and a potential violator of Act 250 with the goal of achieving voluntary compliance. So given the very limited scope of what it can be accomplished under NOAVs, we humbly respectfully request that you delegate that authority to our team, such that NOAVs would be proposed and drafted as under the current situation by our enforcement officers and then approved by the general counsel before being transmitted. So therefore, we would all remain responsible for their content. Does anyone have any questions? Brooke?
I don't have any questions, and I would like to move for the board to delegate such authority. I have the utmost confidence in our general counsel as well as our enforcement team, who I have observed for a long time, and I believe them to be extremely knowledgeable and have shown consistent and good judgment. And so I would be honored to make that delegation motion.
All right. Kirsten,
I'll second the motion.
any discussion by board members? And it looks like Alex has rejoined us, but is also experiencing some computer issues, so might not be able to participate fully. All right, if no one else has any questions or comments regarding the motion, I will take a vote on it. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
This is Alex. Aye.
All right, we have 4. That's unanimous. Thank you all. Fantastic.
Thank
And
you.
thank you. Thank you, Jenny. All right, I will move on to item F, which is the Tier 1A guidelines technical correction. The PDF that was posted online did not have all the red line, but I will note down the last page, it said what was coming out, and there are 2 strikeouts. One was the coming soon for Appendix B, because now we have Appendix B. And the other one was village areas. It unfortunately should have just been village centers. So those were the 2 strikeouts that we're seeking to correct with this version of Tier 1A guidance. Are there any questions? If there aren't any questions, I'd love a motion, but I see Alex.
I was going to make that motion, Sarah. I don't have any questions. I was going to move to approve the changes to the Tier 1A guidelines as described.
All right, well, thank you. Brooke.
The only thing I just wanted to mention or ask is, does this alteration or correction, do we need to revisit any of the analysis and conclusions that we made previously in terms of you not being clear on the definitions? Is there any other, does this trigger any other corrections of any other documents or guidelines? Or does this cure the clarification?
So did you second the motion? Or do we have
I was
a
just,
motion?
I was just asking a question.
Right.
Alex
Just-
kind of beat me to it where he seconded
Just-
the motion.
Procedurally, if you would second, then we can have a discussion. That would be,
Okay, well, I think Alex didn't he?
he made a
Okay,
motion.
I'll second the
Okay,
motion.
fantastic.
Okay,
All right, so discussion. And so discussion is that Appendix B, we will need to revisit the regional plan guidelines as well to reference that new Appendix B. But other than that, these are just 2 technical corrections at this point that don't have any other sort of repercussions.
okay. Just wanted to be sure there was, yeah, that very thing.
Any other questions, comments, or corrections? Are we ready for a motion then? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 This is Alex. Aye.
All right, it looks like we have 4 and we're unanimous again. Fantastic. Before we move on to G, it looks like we have had some other folks join us. I think they're all here for a later item, but I just want to come back to any opportunities for public comment on non-agenda items. Does not appear that we have any. So we'll continue on. And G, the first piece of this, which was added in, is Addison County. We need to redelegate that. And I believe that Kirsten, you were willing to take that on and we can redelegate you from Janet. Are you willing?
Yes, I'm happy to be the lead board member for the Addison pre-application regional plan review.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking that on in Janet's stead, and I'm happy to help as a
Great.
second hand on that. I think we all are willing to help too, to whatever extent we can to get that over the finish line. So Kirsten's amenable. I'd take a motion on that.
Yeah, I'll move to redelegate the designee, board designee for the Addison County Regional Plan to be Kirsten.
I'll second.
Fantastic. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, this is Alex.
Fantastic. We're unanimous again. All right, the next part of that is we have Mount Nescutney Regional Planning Commission that has come in with their pre-application, and we need a designated board person for that. Alex, I had heard that you're perhaps going to be thrown into the saddle for this. What say you?
Yes, Janet and I had discussed that previously, and I had agreed to make this be the designee for this plan. Sure.
Fantastic, and thank you so much. And I think the same thing will absolutely help back you up on this. So we've been doing so far so good. So Brooke.
I'll move to designate Alex to be the Mount Nescutney Regional Planning Commission pre-application designated board member.
Fantastic.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
right, fantastic. Alex, congratulations. You have the Mount Nescutney Regional Plan. All right, we'll move on to item H, which is Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission Future Land Use Area Questions. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so I'd like to just check in. I see we do have some folks here from CCRPC, but are you ready to go, or would you like us to skip and come back? I'm seeing a head nod from Taylor.
We're ready to go.
All right, fantastic. I think you should be able to drive if there's anything that you wish to share, but please let us know. If not, we're happy to share that with you. But thank you so much for joining today. CCRPC app did have a pre-application this fall, which we provide some comments on and some advisory comments. And so I think they'd like to follow up on this, and given some of the previous board discussions about how to handle questions from applicants in the pre-application process before they get to the final, it was suggested that straightforward ones could be handled by staff, and ones that were not as straightforward might want to come back to the board. There were a list of questions submitted by CCRPC that were in the packet that were not straightforward, and I, as being the CCRPC delegate, I had talked with Janet about bringing this back to the board for consideration. So that's sort of my lead into today, and I'd like to turn over to the CCRPC team to take us through that list of questions.
Very
Thank you,
good.
Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Before Kate's going to do our intro, Sarah, I cannot share my screen actually. So if you could allow me to share my screen, I'll bring up a little PowerPoint presentation that will operate within, but we can look at docs, whatever we need to do. I'll also note that Sarah Muskin is joining Kate and I. Sarah's on our on our team here too at CCRPC. She was out on leave while we did our pre-application meetings back in December. And Charlie Baker, our executive director, may join us later. He is triple booked, I believe. So he'll try to get here if he can. So Kate, I'll hand it back to you, and now I can share. Thank you to whoever enabled it.
Very good. Well, thank you everybody for making time for us here on the agenda today. Sarah framed it up. What I will add is that since receiving the LURB's pre-application comments, we've been reviewing those with our municipalities, kind of picking up where we left off on the public outreach process to converse with our towns about and our cities about this whole process. And when we've talked to our towns, we've heard openness to a lot of the advisory comments. We're also getting some feedback and some questions about some of the other comments. So we've been doing that. At the same time, we know that the Land Use Review Board has been continuing its work, interpreting statute, going through other plans besides ours, and that there has been some evolution of your thinking on certain issues and certain interpretations. So in other words, it seems like we've each been taking the steps that we need to take in parallel to figure out this brand new process. And now that we're a couple months since the last time we talked, we thought it was a good time to come back, get some clarification, and talk together. So thank you for working as a board on finding a way for us to do that with you. So as mentioned, we have some questions that were summarized in a mini memo, and then there was a longer memo, kind of a part 2 with some information and justification for each of those questions or background information for you. So we're going to walk through 9 of those questions today. And as you saw in the memo, they kind of fall into a few different categories. We've got some questions or some areas where we're providing additional information for your consideration. For others, we've proposed a couple changes. We're kind of looking for your reactions and a weather report. And then for at least one of them, we're just looking to explain our approach and confirm that that makes sense to you and is acceptable. So I'm going to turn it over to Taylor to start walking through things. As we go, I'll defer to you as the board to, I assume you're going to want to ask questions as you go. We'll just follow your lead on that. Does that sound all right?
It does, and I think that perhaps we could stop after each question. I think we have a time allotted to this today. We may or may not get through all of them. We may ask for additional information to come back. So I think some of these were pretty substantial, and hopefully we can get through as many of them today as we can.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll try our best to be efficient with our time. The first area that we're going to talk about is the planned growth area on the southern part of Shelburne Road in South Burlington. Generally interpreting that to be kind of this area, this is Holmes Road here, south of Holmes Road. The LURB provided a comment that the board could not determine if this proposed PGA meets the requirements of a PGA in our pre-application letter. And so we want to bring back some information for the board to consider. We first note that in that big old memo, the longer one, number 2, that the city plan future land use area for this corridor is balanced, mixed residential and commercial high scale. And there are several actions that note that this area really is intended for growth and a mix of growth, both residential and commercial. We also cite that a lot of this corridor in the South Burlington development regulations is in the commercial 2 zoning district, which does allow for a mix of uses. We provide some specific information in the memo about density, about units per acre. It's fair to say that this area is going to be multi-story buildings, especially if you're doing multi-family housing. And density is quite dense, much more than the Home Act enabled 5 units per acre. We also cite in our memo a few other development regulations that would apply to this area that will help shape what development looks like. And so there is a pretty extensive site plan review section, which provides or requires connectivity to existing sidewalks. There's an urban design overlay district that identifies nodes specifically at some of the major intersections and has some building design standards at those nodes. This entire corridor is also within the transit overlay district. And the intent of that district is to, in areas where we have access to public transit, that we have connectivity in terms of bike and ped connectivity from those buildings to those transit stops within the corridor, trying to support transit-oriented development. We provide some more information about connectivity of this area via the official map as well in the memo, but I'll stop there. The city's planning for growth here. They're regulating for growth here. This place is connected via bike and sidewalks to the rest of the city. I'll stop there. Sarah, any comments or questions from the board on this geography?
So something that I'd like to sort of frame up with this is this was this fall. I think the board has since had a conversation around looking at municipal plans versus municipal regulations to sort of frame up future planning for these areas. This is something that we haven't had a chance to write up yet. I think Janet was planning on, and I think we might have to, as a board, talk about trying to spell that out more in her absence. I think the other thing too is there still is an application that's forthcoming. So I think what CCRPC is looking for in this is feedback as they move forward with their final plan adoption application to make sure that they are headed in the right direction. Is that fair in terms of where you're looking for advisement right now?
That's totally fair, Sarah. Yes.
Okay. So I think with that being said, are there any questions or statements that the board wishes to make regarding this additional information and the direction that CCRPC is going in with regard to the PGA area for the Southern Shelburne Road corridor? Alex.
Yeah, a question for you, Taylor. Because when I initially reviewed this back in the fall, I thought transition infill looks like a natural candidate for transition infill on the south side of Shelburne Road, south of the proposed village center area. What in your mind differentiates a transition infill area from a planned growth area here in Chittenden County?
That's a good question. To me, it's about having clear direction in the municipal plan about what this area is going to be in the future. And from our perspective, the city plan pretty clearly identifies this area as a place that's going to change over the next 25 years into a mixed-use walkable place. I think having that clear direction and then meeting all those criteria in statute about what a PGA is supposed to be is enough to meet that bar of PGA. A transition area to me, Alex, would be more of in the municipal plan saying we need to have a community conversation about this area. We don't have a clear picture as a municipality about how we want to see this area change or transition into something else. And I think the city is beyond that in this case. Kate, anything to add here?
No, thank you.
Helpful. We're bound by what the statute says and how it describes these areas. But I do find the level of planning associated with these areas helpful in making that distinction between a transition infill area and what seems more in terms of a planned growth area. And I would note that when we reviewed the Lamoille County regional plan, that regional planning commission made much more extensive use of the transition infill future land use area designation. But I think it sort of makes sense to me because the communities that are in fact planning to expand into those transition infill areas and reshape them haven't done the same level of sort of intricate planning and regulatory work that a community like South Burlington has done. So it's a little easier, I guess, for me to see a planned growth area designation here. But I was just trying to get your perspective on it. Because again, when I first looked at this back in the fall, I thought, boy, that it seems like Shelburne Road in the southern portion of it, lots of car dealers and, that just seems like a transition infill area as the legislature intended that, or as VAPTA intended that designation to be.
I agree with that assessment, Alex, in entirety. I think we're very fortunate in Chittenden County to have access to a lot of planning funds that the rest of the state doesn't have access to. And that's enabled a lot of our municipalities to do a lot of that detailed planning work over the past 20 years to figure out how to transform places. And that's certainly not the case in the rest of the state.
Yeah, I was just taking a look at what's actually in the statute in 24 VSA 4348A with PGA areas. I think that's a very important part, is that part about the municipal plan indicates that this area is intended for higher density residential and mixed use development. That's one of several, including the area provides for housing that meets the needs of the diversity of social and income groups in the community. I think this is an area that, as we went through the plan, I recall hearing about how housing targets are going to be proposed to be met through some of this municipal planning that's been very well sort of thought through and more robust than some of the other areas that we've looked at. So I feel like this is additional information that's very helpful in terms of meeting more towards PGA and sort of substantiating that. But Alex, you have your hand up and perhaps have other questions or comments.
Was just, looking at the statutory definition again. I think in our review in the fall, making sure these areas have a mix of uses is important. Like they need to, they need to generally follow the smart growth principles that are laid out. And they're described as areas that include civic or cultural sites with active streetscapes. And that's what I was going to ask you about, is in the southern Shelburne Road corridor that we're talking about, what can you point to future civic or cultural sites that are going to populate or hope to populate this area?
Despite my two screens here in front of me, I wish I could have a third screen where I could bring up the city official map, because there might be park space identified on that in this corridor, and we could double check that for you, Alex. What I'll say is that one thing we don't cite in our memo is the public works standards or the public works specs in South Burlington. We could certainly do that. But just the development regulations on their own talk about and regulate connection of these spaces, via sidewalk and via bike path. There are also standards in, the regulation of denser, I think it's in the site plan standards themselves. There's standards about providing for private open space somewhere on the lot related to that multifamily housing. And so whether or not that open space is public or private, longer term, Alex, like there are regulations here that have some element of placemaking. Is that getting to kind of what you're asking about, Alex?
What I think, having a vibrant streetscape is important, and a lot of what you're talking about will likely address that. It's a difficult corridor to do that in, given the history of it and the current development patterns. So that's a challenge. But I seem to remember that when we were discussing the village center at the northern portion of this corridor, that one of our thoughts was that it could potentially be expanded to include more in the way of civic features. There's a park on the east side of Shelburne Road that's behind some neighborhoods that, potentially could have been swept into that village center. And so then it just becomes, again, the question of that southern portion to this that's not in the proposed village center, but is in the proposed planned growth area. If there's any kind of civic infrastructure or facilities that the city is thinking of that might help, make it more than a strip. Make it more than a strip with tall buildings, which is basically, part of what you're saying is that they're planning for taller buildings, mixed use growth. It's still going to be on a very heavily traveled highway that sort of bisects the area. So civic features help in that regard, especially since they're mentioned in the definition. That's why I was asking.
Alex, I think Samansky Park is adjacent to this area. It's,
It's right about here. And to Alex's point, and what we're showing you here on this map is the pre-application version of this village center that the LURB reviewed. I don't know if you can see my cursor anymore. We've taken the LURB comment and actually expanded this village center to essentially follow the future land use area and then zoning district boundaries to include Farrell Park, to include the Orchard neighborhood and Szymanski Park, and kind of come square off here around Holmes Road. And so that village center, right now we're proposing it to be much larger, and from our perspective, pretty clearly, meets that LURB advisory recommendation.
Helpful. Thanks, Taylor, for explaining that. And yeah, you don't need civic features in every square inch of a planned growth area. The proximity to those in a larger village center is a positive thing.
I'll talk about, sorry, Alex, that comment, two other things, and I know these are future things, so you can't rely on them. But one, right now, we're doing a study, I believe, still with the city about crossings here on Shelburne Road of the road itself and ensuring that we have safe crossings. And so that study should be finalized in the next couple months. Hopefully that leads to additional actual capital projects in South Burlington to ensure safe crossing across that highway. The other thing that the city has applied to CCRPC, to our Unified Planning Work Program, for a project in FY27 to do a neighborhood master plan for this new center. The geography isn't totally defined, but in their application, Alex, a lot of what the city talks about is wanting to make sure there are adequate civic assets here, specifically parks and access to them from the surrounding neighborhood. And so I can't provide that to you as evidence today, but the city has applied to do a project that looks at that issue over the next year.
Taylor.
Shall we move on or move on? All right.
any other questions or comments from the board regarding the PGA area? All right, I think this is Kirsten.
I mean, I just, for purpose of providing the requested feedback, what Alex was saying makes sense to me, and thank you for this additional detail. I do think it's relevant and helpful.
Thank you, Kirsten. Okay. We'll move on and talk about the Southern Village Center in Shelburne along Shelburne Road. This is this proposed village center. This is around the lumber property. It doesn't include Rice Lumber anymore. In the LURB pre-application comments, the LURB found that this village center does not meet the requirements of a village center, but did say that we could provide additional information justifying that this meets the requirements of a village center. And I think specifically you were looking for more information about historic and civic assets. And so in terms of what we've provided in these memos is more information about what the town plan says or is planning for in this area. And we did provide some information about the newly adopted zoning in this area. It was adopted in January 2026. And so in what you're seeing here on the screen is the new zoning. You can see that a little bit different geography, but roughly the same is in the SR1 district here in terms of the zoning. Back to the municipal plan, this area is identified as growth area 2 in the municipal plan. It's planned for a wide array of different uses, recognizing the fact that this is in the water and wastewater service area. This particular geography, they have a sub area future land use plan as well. This area is within that mixed use sub area, which is planning for more diverse residential neighborhoods and gateway features. There is going to be a future town plan update in the next year where the municipality is going to more clearly identify these areas as nodes. They're planning on doing that to help support their case that these areas should be centers. In terms of the zoning itself, we want to note that these areas are regulated in a way that is going to be really, really dense. Allowances up to 90% lot coverage, a max density of 20 units per acre. minimum lot size of a half acre, which is fairly small when we're talking about that kind of density. And they actually have a build to line that's, that's regulating the placement of structures on these lots that have frontage on Route 7. So from our perspective, the built environment within the center is going to look dense. It's going to look pretty vertical as opposed to the areas around it. It should feel more like a center. In terms of historic and civic assets, the old Dutch Mill is on the State Historic Register. That is within this proposed village center. That's a restaurant. And there are two, from our perspective, pretty major civic assets in this area. One is Heartworks, which is a childcare center, relatively large childcare center. And then two is the Lakeview Community Care Home Facility. This is a Howard Center facility. For those not familiar with Chittenden County, that's like our social services agency here in Chittenden County. And this community care home, I will get the number wrong, but somewhere between 10 and 15 homes for folks with severe mental illness with around-the-clock care. So this is a facility that is serving the entire region and folks that need that kind of care. From our perspective, again, the municipality is planning for a center level of growth here. They're regulating for it as well. And we do have an historic asset and some civic assets to help meet the statute as well. Any questions or comments on this Southern Village Center or any guidance?
So while people are mulling it over, one of the things I'll come back to is I think we as a board have had discussions about the historic assets and not necessarily requiring them. I think that we're talking about more of the historic settlement area rather than if something is listed or not. So I think to sort of give some sort of relief to that, although yes, the Dutch Mill is historic roadside architecture. I think the one thing is the civic assets might be more important to try and focus in on. And I think to talk about something that was brought up previously was municipal plans maybe for more civic assets, whether it's a park or some sort of presence that's not necessarily a privately run or owned venture in the area, maybe on an official map or something of that nature might be helpful. I'm going to stop rambling and see if any of their board members have any thoughts about this.
In your response to that comment real quick, Sarah, before Alex goes, we do have a municipally owned lot here in this center. We had talked about that during our pre-application meetings. It had been planned for a fire station, but it is not in the capital budget. And so we've really backed away from identifying that as a definite civic asset. But there is a larger municipal owned lot in this area that could be a wide array of civic assets depending on community needs.
Alex.
That's still helpful to understand, Taylor, so I appreciate that. The statutory definition begins with that these are mixed-use centers bringing together community economic activity and civic assets. In my mind, that's what a village center is. It's a place where people tend to gather, and there's a reason to go there. And I'm still not convinced, frankly, that this area is going to be that. So I appreciate the additional information. Happy to consider it and think on it more. But yeah, it's still difficult for me to wrap my head around this being a destination in a way that the proposed downtown area won't continue to be the real magnet, the real destination, just down the road, where people congregate, where farmers markets happen, where there's cultural, improvements and activities and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I definitely willing to consider all this stuff. But it's got to pass that test in my mind. It's got to be a place that brings together community economic activity and civic assets in order to be a village center. And honestly, I'm not quite sure what the difference is to the municipality. Like we're making these designations in part to determine which areas are eligible for tier 1 status. And both planned growth areas and village centers are. So
Mhm.
if it were to flip to a planned growth area and our board was, amenable to that, I'm not sure what Shelburne would be losing by coming back at a later date when this, when the capital budget and the municipal lot and everything is a little more put together in terms of how this is going to be a magnet for people in the community to come and visit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of PGA designation here instead of center. I certainly understand that. I don't have the matrix in front of me in terms of what's available in a center versus a PGA right now in terms of potential benefits, but they are fairly close as of right now. But I do think it is important to note that the municipality is planning for this to be a different kind of area than the area around it. I certainly understand your point in terms of being a magnet for both residents and visitors to Shelburne, and centers needing to be that. I would just ask the board to think about that at different scales. That the downtown center here in Shelburne is going to be, they're planning it for it to be of regional and maybe statewide significance, given the assets that are there, like Shelburne Museum. But with a center like this, and the center we'll talk about on the northern part of Shelburne Road, it definitely intended to do more of serving the surrounding neighborhoods, about this being a place that's walkable in terms of childcare from the neighborhoods that are right around it. And I think that'll be even more greatly enhanced once we start to see property owners start building at this level of scale, 3, 4, 5-story buildings at 20 units an acre. People are going to want to walk to childcare, walk to stores, and walk to the bus, and to go to their job downtown or in downtown Shelburne. So I hear you, but I think the town's planning to have these places be the kind of places you're describing.
So I think there are two very important things here, at least to me, on this front. And so this is a sort of hard thing about facilitating the meeting and also participating in it. And so please, I invite other board members to step in. But I had the opportunity to drive south into Addison County down Route 7 yesterday afternoon and took a look at this area, as well as a very good chunk of the area in Addison County that we were just visiting a couple weeks ago now. And I was reminded of West Cornwall and the very tiny village that was there in terms of scale. There really isn't a whole lot for people to come to right now. There's a fire station that's there, and some residences, and not much else. There are some very tiny villages proposed throughout Addison County that have less structural amenities going on than this area. But I think one of the common themes in them is that they did have a civic piece. And I think I'll come back to sort of focusing on how important it is to know about some of the planning that's going on, because didn't we hear a lot on West Cornwall and all the good things that they're striving towards? And I think I hear is Shelburne is working on this front and continuing to work on it. And so I would say I feel comfortable leaving the door open, but I'm not sure at what point Shelburne's going to be able to get through in timing with the CCRPC plan. And to Alex's point, not too much of a difference between PGA and Village Center. I do recognize that there are some step benefits with the CIB board that are different. But so I think this is maybe an area where we can leave the door open to tell us more. But at the same time, place a lot of importance in terms of doing that good planning work about what this is on trajectory to become. So I don't know, Kirsten or Brooke, if you would like to jump in on any of this. Brooke.
I'm absorbing the conversation. I have questions that are being answered, and I appreciate the presentation very much. I don't have anything to add verbally at this point.
All right, Kirsten.
I mean, just again, because, you know, the RPC has brought forward this very detailed information and is asking for feedback. I'm kind of, like Sarah, I think kind of alluded to a little bit just now, I'm trying to square this with some of the other, in some cases, very small village centers with very limited features that we have been identifying elsewhere. So I'm not sure. I think this does have some, you know, community type assets in the form of the, you know, the childcare facility and the Howard Center operated Lakeview Care Home and at least one historic resource. And the zoning, it allows for, you know, high density. So I think we can, as a board, talk about this more and definitely leave the door open. I'm not seeing it as like, oh, in my mind, like, oh no, this is definitely not a village center. It definitely seems to be planned for that.
So
Thank you, Kristen. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I don't know, Brooke, let me,
Just that, I mean, I don't want folks to think I'm monosyllabic here. I very much support the notion of a broader definition of the historical features. I don't think that it's necessary per se to have, you know, the state registered kinds of properties. To me, what Sarah was articulating about it being more of a civic gathering place, I think is important. But what Kirsten just said about, you know, struggling to be consistent, I am open to this information. I just need to think more on it. So thank you for providing it, and I am very open to analyzing it and figuring it out.
All right,
Thank you for
Joe.
that, Brooke. And yeah, no, to respond to that, Brooke, you know, I think Kate, Sarah, and I've kind of just I've kept thinking about, man, we learned a lot in terms of what we should have maybe provided you back in December, because it's a lot of information to absorb, you know, less than a week before a meeting where we're going to talk about this. And so we know that for next time, kind of the level of information we need to provide for the board, maybe that first time around as a part of the pre-application. All right, we'll move on and talk about the Northern Village Center in Shelburne, along Shelburne Road. This is around the Shelburne Meat Market, modern design. There's a lamp shop and the Cronbach property, which is planned for 60 units of residential development. The LURB found that this area does not meet requirements in your pre-application letter. You cited the lack of civic assets and it being too small to be act as a cohesive center. In terms of providing more information to the board about this area, we want to note that this area is planned for much the same way as that southern center that you just saw in terms of the municipal plan and in terms of zoning. We've thought about expanding the boundaries of the center to, one, better align with municipal planning and zoning, but then two, to include the Samuel Blinn House, which is an historic resource. It's on the state register, just to the south of this proposed center. We've also talked about expanding it perhaps a little bit larger to include a lot of the recent development by Champlain Housing Trust in terms of Bay Ridge and in terms of Harbor View, which is just south of this proposed center. We'll just be straightforward with each other. There are no civic assets from our perspective in the center. That is just what it is. There's no official map in Shelburne yet identifying any future civic assets. But again, in terms of what the municipality is planning for and how it's regulating this place, much the same as that Southern Village Center. Kate, anything to add on this one?
I'll just underscore your point that this is a very small center as we originally conceived of it, but reaching out for it to be broader is something that we would be open to. But nothing else to add besides that.
and unlike other geographies Sarah had, I would actually like to talk about this village center in the context of the next slide, which is the northern planned growth area in Shelburne, if that's okay. Because I think from our perspective, what happens with the center kind of determines what happens around the center in terms of what land use category should be used. And so, we know that planned growth areas must have connection to centers, right? And so if this center goes away, overall, we're looking for feedback about what we should do with the surrounding area. And I want to note that this northern planned growth area, which is generally this area, in the pre-application letter, the board determined that said it could not determine the proposed PGA meets requirements specifically about connectivity. And the board actually noted 3 specific geographies, I believe. One was along Bay Road, wanting more information about bike ped connectivity there. 2 was the northern part of Spear Street, wanting more information there. And then 3, actually way over here, was just this little section west of Shelburne downtown center on Harbor Road. And so we want to note that the municipal plan talks about connectivity of these areas in a few different ways. It's very hard to see with all this hatching, but up here on Spear Street, there is a plan to have a on-street bike lanes the entire length of Spear Street in Shelburne. Here on Bay Road, this area is identified as a area that needs future study. There has been a scoping study done for pathway in this area. And then over here on Harbor Road, there is a plan to actually extend existing pathway from the village all the way to Shelburne Farms. And they're all, So the town plan does that. We do want to note that the town does not have an adopted capital improvement plan or a capital budget. They have a working document that they use every year, but they don't formally adopt it. They just use the working document and then fold that information into the municipal budget itself. The town understands to more clearly meet these standards in the future. They should adopt a separate CIP, so that's something that they certainly hope to do in the future. But overall here, want to provide some information about how the periphery of this planned growth area is connected to centers, either the downtown or that southern village center or the northern village center. That's a lot of information. Where do folks want to start?
Let's start with the village.
Okay.
And I will note that I think some of the board's discussions previously had been about the walkability component, which was impacting some of our comments on the PGA area. And that was taking a look at things more in context and not necessarily a defined mileage or something of that nature. So I think a lot of the information that you provided around the PGA area and the additional planned facilities helps a lot towards, I think, the way that we're looking at the walkability component now. But I think it's well taken in terms of it has to have a relationship to a village center. And if that village center does not exist, that becomes a bit strained. So I'd love to hear some board thoughts about the village center now with this additional information, and any questions or comments from board members. Alex.
So, I'm still not convinced on the northern village center. I appreciate the additional information. I think the concern about not having a village center proximate enough to justify the rest of the planned growth area around it is a tail wagging the dog. And the dog needs to be the village center. And that little shopping plaza and the parcel on the other side of the road where there's development proposed, I just that is not a gathering area. That's a stop along a highway that happens to have some people in it and a plaza to go shop at or maybe work at. Without some substantial civic features that make that a destination, or commercial features that attempt to do the same thing, I just don't see how it makes sense as a village center. So yeah, I still got a real problem with that very small village center that seems to be there, A, because the town is interested in seeing more development, but B, because it's just sort of, an equidistant stop along the road away from the north of the last one in order to spread them out. Yeah, so that's where I am at with that village center. I don't think my mind's changing much based on what you've presented today.
Alex, the equidistant nature of that center is luck. We took this geography from the future land use plan as well as, well, more, not the future land use plan. We took it from the zoning that was updated a month ago, where this has a different zoning district that allows for more compact uses than what's around it. So happy coincidence that it's halfway between the other two, but based on some zoning.
Yeah. Thanks for
Yeah.
the clarification. I do think there's a very substantive difference between a community like Cornwall and a proposed village center in a place that doesn't have much going on yet in West Cornwall, and a place like this, which is on a major highway in a very developed area with lots of commercial, car-centric commercial uses. The potential for the future, is different, and context matters. So I would just encourage my fellow board members to see the contextual difference between a place that's much more rural and is trying to eke out a village center that, doesn't, is going to look like one in the future. It doesn't look a lot like one today. And a place like this, which, is a very well-developed commercial highway, and the municipality's intentions to do more with it are admirable, but that doesn't change the context that it sits in. So anyway, like I said, I'm just not convinced that this particular spot warrants a village center designation or land area use.
Working with different towns in Chittenden County and cities, it's been very interesting to look at how they are envisioning the future building on their past, because they do each have a different context. And we know that lots of communities in Vermont have a state route as a main street, or sometimes a US route as a main street. So that is going to predetermine what can do. It means they're starting from a harder space, but it also means that villages are different things in different contexts. And it means that they've got a different climb in some places than others. So yeah, I appreciate the recognition of context, and also have come to feel like that means we're going to end up someplace different. The village isn't going to look the same as a traditional Vermont village. And so how can that be planned for in a way that provides assurance that we can still call this a center, even if it's a different type of center? It's very interesting to think about.
And the thing that I'll come back to is these are future land use maps, future land use planning, not current. And so this is to some degree recognizing what's aspirational versus the limitations of what's there in present. And I think that's where I'd like to direct my comments back, particularly sounds like Shelburne 2027 hopefully is working towards a new plan, working on doing some of this planning for the future. I think it's great that we have some information about the current zoning, some of the current sort of thinking, but I'd say that sort of makes that planning piece all the more important, because I think that's really what the statute is looking at, is particularly with regard to PGA areas, is taking a look at what the municipality is doing for future land use planning. And I think it was actually in the context of the CCRPC plan where our own future land use map viewer pulls in, unfortunately, zoning districts, but not future land use areas from municipal plans. And that's really what we should be looking at. By default, we sometimes bleed over into current zoning. It's a bit harder, I think, to meet the jump where there's a lot of existing built environment. But just trying to echo that we should really be predicating the future land use map based upon future land use plans. So happy to hear from other board members about thoughts on the village. Brooke.
Yeah, I think with the limited properties that are currently or that were originally proposed, I agree with Alex wholeheartedly kind of on that score. In terms of the expansion of it to include the historic property, and other expansion, I think that is trying to get at the future plan to try to create that civic center. And I'm not disregarding what Alex is saying at all, but as it stands now, I just don't see where we get a village. But with that possible expansion and inclusion of a historic property, I think that makes a difference in terms of the analysis. Alex has me pretty convinced at the present.
Kirsten, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say something similar to what Brooke just said. Alex has me convinced too. Yeah, there's not much there. And I appreciate, I mean, of course, that's context specific. So perhaps adding the historic site would change, would change the formula, like it would, but if there's no civic assets, like I don't know. I apologize. I would like to provide definitive, helpful feedback. And this is still not one that I would say that I think would necessarily qualify. And so, but always open to considering, what other factors maybe we haven't considered or a configuration. So
So I think what I'd like to throw at the board before we potentially move on from here is something that was brought up about the village centers and PGAs. I think some of the other areas that we've looked at, Middlebury is coming to mind, where the PGA bled over from a downtown that was in a different municipality altogether into some of the surrounding municipalities. So the surrounding municipalities didn't have an adjacent village center of their own. It was relying upon an adjacent. In other words, PGA areas have the potential to be a bit more expansive. Going back to what Taylor was noting about if this area instead becomes more a PGA instead of a village center, does that give pause to any board members, or do you believe that a larger PGA area, particularly within the Chittenden County context, could be appropriate?
So Sarah, I'll dip my toe into those waters. I think that given the context, a larger PGA area, especially combined with transition infill areas, which the proposed future land use mapping for this area do include, I think that would be appropriate along the Shelburne Road corridor. There are some significant distances involved, but they're they're doable. And so I think that makes some sense to me, especially given the context. I remain leery about Spear Street on the far eastern side of the planned growth area because of the lack of connection between potential future development along the west side of Spear Street and the Shelburne Road corridor. You know, and maybe I'm missing something in the capital plan and the RPC folks want to point that out, but connectivity between the Spear Street corridor and the Shelburne Road corridor appears to be limited or non-existent until you get to Webster Road. So that I'm still having I'm still concerned about that sort of easterly portion of the PGA, not so much the PGA portion along Shelburne Road itself.
I just brought up the map from the town plan. You know, it does note, I believe it's phrased as like a future potential connection, this kind of brown hatched area. And we have a little bit of existing sidewalk here in this neighborhood, west of Spear, and then we have a hatched area identifying that we need to do some more study here in this area about how we better connect Spear to Route 7. But I hear you, Alex. I think that's an accurate assessment of what's going on in that geography.
Yeah, and to be clear, Taylor, I think that design standards and development patterns can ensure that there's pedestrian bike facilities along Spear Street as development happens there. My concern is how those people who can then walk and bike along Spear Street get to the centers that they want to be connected to, either the downtown in Shelburne or perhaps the Southerly Village Center that we were talking about earlier. And it seems like the historic development along the east side of Shelburne Road never contemplated there being a connection to Spear Street. And so you're going to have neighborhoods sitting right next to each other that kids literally can't walk between. And the only thing they can do is walk 2.5 miles down Spear Street, down, across Webster Road, and then back up to their friend's house up Shelburne Road on Route 7. And that's an unfortunate historical hiccup, but I think it does beg the question about whether that area meets the requirements for a PGA in a way that the Shelburne Road corridor, I think, does meet the requirements without as much of an issue. And I feel bad about it, honestly, right? Like the municipal infrastructure is extending out to that portion of Spear Street. I see the intention, right, to have more dense settlement there, but the definitions call on us to look to those connections, and they're kind of long and tenuous in that portion of the PGA.
Any other board members?
So, Taylor, just so I'm understanding this slide where it's references that there's a network of primitive paths connecting neighborhoods to villages. Is that the situation with the eastern edge of this planned growth area where it runs up against Spear Street? That there are is that where there's primitive paths?
If you no, actually, it's these brown trails down through here and kind of a different part of the PGA that are the primitive paths. They're through the La Platte Nature Area to some of the PGA off of Falls Road. Not so much over here in the northeast part of the PGA that we've been talking about.
Okay, thank you for confirming. And
I think we have enough as staff to go on based on the board's comments. So thank you for that. I know this is a pretty thorny one to wrestle with. I know we're short on time, so Sarah.
I would ask maybe we can finish up Shelburne potentially. I think you had questions about the downtown center, which maybe we can quickly wrap on Shelburne.
We can shuffle along and do Shelburne real quick, and come back to these others. Shelburne Museum. LURB said that you should exclude Shelburne Museum from the downtown center. It's not consistent with the definition of a downtown center. We provided that direction to Shelburne. And locally, that stirred up a lot of feelings. The Select Board and Planning Commission really wants to emphasize that that museum is a part of their downtown center from their perspective and a strong part of their identity as a municipality. The museum does have potential plans, nothing concrete, nothing approved for lodging or other uses on its property. But we did want to ask again if the LURB's viewpoint of including the museum in the downtown center has changed, and just wanted to express to the board, the importance of this locally. Kate, anything to add on Shelburne Museum?
Sure. What I would pass along from the select board and the planning commission, besides the idea that the Shelburne Museum might be developing some lodging, is that you've got the sidewalk going down both sides of Shelburne Museum. Select board and planning commission members told us that there were some events that were free and open to the public. And they really emphasized the identity and economic development piece. So functionally, as a part of the village's operation and economy, they see this as a very important thing, even if it does not really, even if the LURB feels it doesn't comport with the idea of the village. We wanted to describe to you the role that it plays to the municipality.
Brooke,
Can I ask about that property south of Shelburne Museum on the other side of, what is it, Marset Road? It seemed very odd to me that that was included, and I'm curious why.
Oh, good question, Brooke. You're going to stretch my memory a little bit. That property, I believe, is in the same either land use or zoning district as the museum itself, not the same land use or zoning district as the land across Shelburne Road, and that's why we chose to include it in the downtown center. But I will have to go back and look exactly at that reason. I do not believe that corner property is owned by the museum. A separate property.
It's any idea what the use is of it?
Historically, I believe it's been residential. I think right now it may be vacant.
Taylor, can you refresh our memory as to what the municipal plan calls for the museum? Like what is the future land use that the town envisions for that? Is it, I'm being a little cheeky, but I assume it's not 4-story multifamily dwellings and commercial activities and that sort of thing. It's I assume it's, what will you tell me? What is the municipal's future land use a call for the museum property?
Yeah, and I'm going to go off the top of my head in terms of municipal plan. I cannot tell you. I'd have to pop out of here. But I'm going to go back and look at the zoning because I can definitely tell you what they're planning for there. In terms of municipal zoning, the museum, even under this, sorry about that. Just keep going. The museum historically has always been in its own zoning district with a few other small properties here on that's, oh man, name of that road is escaping me.
is it Bostwick?
There we go, Bostwick Road. And so essentially, what's allowed here in that museum institutional is generally not residential uses. It's small scale commercial, lodging. The development in this area or in that zoning district in particular, I believe needs to be a plan unit development. We've talked about multiple principal structures on a lot. I'd have to go look at the purpose statement for that zoning district, but I believe it does talk about connection to the village itself. I can provide that information as supplemental information to the board if that's helpful.
I'll chime in that in the 2019 town plan, there are four or five broad planning areas. One of them is growth area 1, and that is basically the historic village, Falls Road, and then the museum. So those are all in the same category. Within that are some subcategories: village center, museum district, village residential in the future land use planning. But at the coarsest grain, they're in growth area 1.
Just like the rest of the village.
Just like the rest of the village. Yeah.
Kirsten.
So just so I'm clear, you're allowed to have a PUD in that district, and the museum is contemplating doing some residential.
Contemplating doing some lodging, so doing
Lodging.
Some
a hotel.
lodging, okay, sorry. Well, I'm willing to reconsider. I think that it does have this close proximity to the downtown area and pedestrian connectivity, and I can understand the sort of response from local officials who are saying, what do you mean the museum's not part of our downtown? So I guess just as one board member, I can understand that.
Rick or Alex? Alex.
Yeah, I want to be sensitive to that too. And as a Chittenden County resident, I do think of Shelburne Museum as part of the Shelburne's, village center, downtown, whatever you want to call it right now. I visited it. There are concerts held there. People walk to those. It serves in that function. Honestly, it was our discussions during these prior board meetings that point out the fact that it's fenced, that it's not open to the public, that it dwarfs the rest of, on a land area basis, the rest of the proposed downtown area. And so from those sort of dry technical standpoints, it doesn't seem appropriate. But from a sort of function and feel standpoint, it does. I'm trying to think of other examples. I don't know if anybody else can, of villages or downtowns that have institutional uses in them, whether they be colleges or universities or other museum properties, where those are swept into, a downtown designation. At least the old, legacy version of a downtown designation. So maybe there's some other examples that we could better hang our hat on.
Yeah. Alex, this is a different scale, but one of the things that I think a planning commissioner said when we chatted with them about this was lots of downtowns have museums that require admission. They're just smaller. And so there are, within any downtown, certain places that can only be accessed if you're spending money there. This just happens to be a bigger one.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
I'm sensitive to that too, but and I guess it's up to the Community Investment Board to decide what portion of a larger downtown future land use area qualifies for various incentives through the STEP program. As important as Shelburne Museum is, and as wonderful as it is, I love it. Have since I was a kid and did field trips there. It would seem awkward to me that it would be eligible for the same level of benefits that accrue to other locations that are serving a more diversified downtown purpose, and not just a fenced museum area. So maybe that's not a hang up I need to have, because another board will decide, where those benefits accrue. Yeah.
Brooke.
Totally okay with the museum. But I do think that one property on the other side to the south of the large road just maybe it's orphaned there and it might be part of the same zoning district, but I see the boundary really as being more appropriate for the southern boundary of the museum as opposed to just, that's a pretty big road to the south. It's just this one residential property. I don't know. It just seems odd to me that you would incorporate that. But
We'll revisit that.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I know we're supposed to get to road construction jurisdiction guidance at 2:10. I think we're probably about halfway through. I don't know, Taylor or Kate, if you had a sense of how much time you need to get through the rest of these. I'd like to at least take one more, which is River Corridor, but what do you think you need for time to get through?
River Corridor, I'm hoping we can do that in less than 5 minutes. In terms of the rest of the presentation, we gave you the thorny ones first. And so I'm hoping we can get through we still got Williston Road to talk about. That's a little thorny. We'd probably need another 20 minutes to get through the rest of the presentation.
Board members, what are your thoughts?
I'm happy to keep going.
You want to give this another 20 minutes?
I think we should.
Okay. Let's do it,
Okay.
and let's see, 2:45, let's try and put that as a cutoff, but maybe we could build momentum and do river corridors really quick, because I
Yeah.
think why I wanted to frame that in is that was one of the areas the board had discussed. The board endorses the whole concept of having future or flood hazard areas as overlays. I think one of the other things that you pointed out was along the 100-year floodplain, it's been mapped as rural conservation, exception to that rule, being downtown centers and village centers or planned growth areas. As above, fine, and also all river corridors, 100-year floodplains represent crosshatch as overlay. That I think is fine too, given some of our current discussion on FHAs. So I think the question that you asked for us, does this explanation provide the blurb with enough information about this topic to conclude that the CCRPC has mapped these areas uniformly in conformance with statute? I believe the answer is yes. I'm happy for others to jump in. Kirsten.
So just so I'm clear, this supplemental information is really just how it would be represented on the map.
Correct.
It's not changing the overall requirements with respect to river corridors, flood hazard areas, tier 1B, et cetera. It's just
Correct.
how it's shown on the map.
Yep.
Okay.
It's just telling you how the approach we took to show it on the map.
Yep.
How's the rest of the board on this? Are you guys okay with this? Seeing a head nod from Brooke.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't really have strong feelings about this issue, and we've talked about it in other regions where they chose to map river corridors as consistent with the underlying future land use area around it and just represent them as crosshatch areas as an overlay. So I'm fine with this approach, which is sort of similar.
Already. Well, there, we
Okay.
crossed another one off the list.
Beautiful. And I'm going to bring us back into the black hole and talk about another hard one. I'm going to bring us to
The pink hole, Taylor. It's pink.
the pink hole that is South Burlington and Williston Road area. So for both South Burlington and Williston, for the planned growth areas, I'll circle kind of here, kind of west of Taft Corners, east of this center that is now going away. That'll now be planned growth area. The board said it could not determine if these areas met the requirements of a PGA. And so in terms of the supplemental evidence or information we've provided to the board, here I'll break and talk about each municipality individually. in South Burlington, we have multiple future land use areas identified in the municipal plan, some residential, mostly around sort of historic residential. That's a bit on islands in this area, but then a lot of the area around it is, commercial industrial in terms of future land use district. Over on the Williston side of the border, we kind of have the same thing. We have a few areas that are identified as residential because of legacy residential, mostly off Brownell Road and South Brownell Road. We have a gateway district, which is mixed use here at the corner of Brownell and Williston Road. And then we have an industrial zoning district that incorporates a lot of the development off Industrial Ave, Shunpike Road, and over to kind of the western part of Marshall Ave. And so here we have a mix of uses, but not always all together in one land use area locally or one zoning district. So there is kind of this question about what is this mix of uses that's called for in PGA, and does the way that Williston and South Burlington are doing it here meet that statutory requirement. In terms of supplemental information we provided, we did note that these areas are areas of high concentrations of employment. We provided some information about number of jobs in Williston, South Burlington. Can't narrow it down to a smaller geography based on the data we have to us, but want to note that South Burlington has the second most jobs in the entire state next to Burlington, substantially more than number 3 Rutland, and I think Williston is also in the top 5 or 6. And a lot of those jobs are concentrated in these areas. Do you want to note that in terms of connectivity of these PGAs to other areas, both of these municipalities have adopted official maps where they've identified bike ped connections to the centers and actually to each other and to the broader regional network. And so this area is going to be accessible via bike ped infrastructure from centers and from that surrounding kind of legacy residential areas around it. In South Burlington, we provided some additional information in the development regulations about how development is designed, those same site plan review standards requiring building orientation to the street, allowing multi-story structures, got to have parking side and rear, got to have pedestrian access from the street. And then specifically, actually, up, I believe it is on Williston Road, there is that transit overlay district again, and a new development needs to provide access to transit stops. In Williston, it is a little bit different in terms of how they're regulating. They do have some design review standards specifically along the Williston Road corridor, and then along the Marshall Ave corridor. And as I noted before, they have that official map that is planning for better connectivity of bike ped infrastructure across this entire area. That is South Burlington and Williston in terms of PGA and additional information about supporting the case for it. Any questions or thoughts from the board?
Don't everybody jump in all at once.
I'll note one other thing while people gather their thoughts. This PGA area to the south of the interstate around the Meadowland Industrial District or Industrial Park. We've talked to the city of South Burlington. We're going to move that to Enterprise. That's going to come out of PGA. The city is still interested in retaining PGA north of the interstate, where they have access to public transit and definite walkability to the surrounding residential uses.
We're on such a roll with floodplains. It was easy, and then you had to swap to the joy kill. All right, Alex.
I know.
Yeah, again, I appreciate all the additional information. I know we asked for it because we couldn't determine. I'm still having a hard time determining. These still look like, at least on the Williston side, Marshall Ave, Shunpike, still looks like an enterprise zone, future land use area to me. It's sure planned growth areas can include such areas, but it just seems so large and so uniform in its commercial industrial, especially industrial footprint and character. That's why it feels more like an enterprise area. I realize that enterprise areas, will not benefit from potential tier one status. So that's a pretty significant difference from the Act 250 standpoint between those two future land use area types. Yeah, this is a tough one. That's as much as I can say right now.
Kirsten or Brooke?
I'd like to hear from you, Sarah, if you don't mind. I feel like I'm in an oral exam.
I too feel a lot more comfortable on the South Burlington side than on the Williston side. I think the single use of the industrial, and I think some of the information that you provide included information on pre-existing residential within the area, which I think is great. I think that that's something where I think you're on the right track, and I think with the Williston side, where I was at is really wanting to see some additional information submitted with the final application, more so sort of tying it all together in terms of, yes, you can have these sort of carve outs for single use, but sort of thread it together of how does this fit? And I think within PGA areas, there's definitely that economic base that can be tied in, but getting into that sort of high density residential mix. And so I think that's really crucial to consider what the future land use plans of the municipality are. And perhaps just, I know Wilson's done a lot of great work on that and providing more information. I know that they had their new municipal plan was arriving around the same time that the pre-application was too. So maybe there's more information yet to come that could be added to supplement to sort of, particularly on the Williston side, try and tie everything together of how this PGA area is going to strive to become that diversified mixed use area.
That is helpful. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, and I would just follow up by saying, I do see some difference between the South Burlington and Williston sides that we keep talking about, but I do continue to have a little bit of heartburn about Technology Park, which is on the South Burlington side, south of Kimball Ave, north of the interstate. I would think it would be hard to find anyone who would say that the development that has happened there is anything but large scale industrial development. The buildings are immense. The parking lots are immense. The parcels are immense. And so, yeah, it's all context, right? And scale dependent. If these were smaller industrial uses in a matrix of diversified land use types, it wouldn't have any issue at all. But because they represent giant land areas, giant swaths of land with huge industrial uses on them, that I don't see ever being redeveloped in a substantive way to provide that diversity of uses, just feels more like an enterprise zone and wants to be that and probably always will be that, especially snubbed right up to Interstate 89, where it's a perfect use of that property rather than trying to put, people's homes there. So yeah, it's a tough nut to crack. And it's not just the Williston South Burlington divide, but yeah.
Kirsten.
So I guess I'll say, like what Sarah and Alex are describing is consistent with our prior conversation about this and continues to make sense to me. But I also wonder if it might be possible to retain some of these areas as PGA and identify others as enterprise. Like maybe if it could get a little more granular to be considering, because I'm blanking on, and I apologize, but I do recall that there was mention of at least one residential project that was being contemplated that was seen to be compatible with, yeah, up in there. So I just wonder if, yeah, it can be revisited with a more granular look at where might you have that residential component in and amongst this area within both towns. And think about maybe like Alex and Sarah have been suggesting, maybe consider some of it as enterprise.
I feel really good about our ability to get more granular in Williston. Definitely. We've had conversations with Williston along the lines of what the board has just been discussing amongst itself. We could also look at doing the same in South Burlington. I think the trouble we get into is just timeline in terms of how long we have to work on this map before we have to go get it adopted by our board. But we can talk about that at the end. But I overall appreciate the board's comments on how difficult this area is in particular to make fit in these 11 categories.
Any other thoughts on the board before we jump to a different area?
Just say I'm on board with what Alex and you and Kirsten just talked about, particularly the enterprise areas. More granularity. Good idea.
All right.
Well, yeah, we will stop torturing you, hopefully, and we'll talk about some easier things. And you also will hear Kate talk instead of me.
Very good. Thank you, Taylor. So we put Colchester and Burlington centers together because you had comments on each of them. Here's the reference map so you can see where we're talking about in each area. So in each case, Burlington's downtown, southern downtown center and Colchester's two village centers near the bay, the LURB advised that they did not meet the definitions. And our advisory comment, and the advisory comment we received in Burlington, as you can see, is to join the southern proposed downtown center with the traditional downtown center. So we've worked with the city and come up with a concept for what that could look like. That's on your left. In Colchester, the request was for more information as we talked it through with the municipality and thought about what their future plans were, some of the public feedback that we had heard. We actually came up with an alternate proposal that we wanted to run by you. There was a center on Blakely Road around the town office complex. We removed that center. And instead we had a more expanded center along West Lake Shore Drive there that reaches down to encompass a public park that is connected by sidewalks and that better aligns with the future land use map for this district, which is intended as an activity center. So we sketched these out in collaboration with each municipality, and we're bringing them to you to get your reactions.
Do I take Burlington first? All right. How do board members feel about Burlington? I feel like this is exactly what we asked for. So I'm feeling that this is pretty straightforward. I'm seeing a head nod for Kirsten, maybe from Brooke. Alex gives it 2 thumbs up. All right, this is Coney Bert, 2 thumbs up. I think you guys are good on the Burlington side unless anybody wants to chime in. I will disclose that I'm a previous planner for Colchester, removed for several years now. I'd like to hear comments from other people first accordingly.
So I like it. It does seem to be responsive to what we were suggesting. although I think we were thinking that the connected village center might go down Blakely Road a bit. So this is actually smaller than the village center that I thought you might come back with. But it looks like you've included the Colchester's new recreational center, and you've got Bayside Park in there, right? So it
Yes.
does have the civic anchors that really drive gathering in this place and makes it a place, makes it a center in my mind, in ways that some of the others we talked about earlier don't. So this looks good to me. It's awkward that it's so narrow in some spots, but that's just a function, I think, of the reality of the place and the lake and the infrastructure that the municipality has supporting those areas. So while I might say you could go a bit further, what you're showing is responsive to what we had said earlier, and it makes sense to me. It seems to hang together.
Kirsten or Brooke?
Totally agree.
I
Kirsten?
agree. I was gonna also mention it's awkwardly narrow in the middle, but it hangs together, as Alex to borrow his words. So yeah, I think it does respond to the board's earlier comments. So
All right.
Great. All right, well, let's move on if we may to, I believe, our last item, which is the South Burlington Downtown Center. So this is a legacy new town center, and it was determined to meet the requirements of statute. And then you also had a question in the advisory remarks, which is the LURB was wondering, should the neighborhoods west of Dorset Street or neighborhoods between Dorset and Heinsberg Road be included? Or that was our question too. Sorry, you asked us to consider expansion along Dorset Street, along Kennedy Drive, and once we made that little jog down the road, we wondered whether we should head a little further west and a little further east as well to encompass neighborhoods. And we're curious what you thought of that idea of including neighborhoods in the proposed expansion.
So speaking to that comment is the one on the left, absolutely yes. I think that does. I think the one on the right, we brought in that there's a park that seemed to be a good anchor for that, and absolutely sort of including some of those areas too. So I think that fits the thinking in the comments, at least as I believe that they were posed, but I'd like to hear other board members.
So I like it. I like the idea of it anyways. It's always been a little perplexing to me why densely settled neighborhoods adjacent to more diversified mixed use areas aren't part of downtowns or village centers in the past, in the legacy designations that we had. I was always frustrated by that. And so now that we get to have some say over it, I like it. I like having these neighborhoods included. It's a cohesive area. It's connected, it's fully walkable, and it helps sort of blend what in South Burlington can be a pretty heavy commercial footprint and percent of land area with more residential, which is, a nice mix. I kind of thought the same for portions of Burlington too. So I am receptive to the idea.
Kirsten or Brooke? Kirsten.
can you just touch on the zoning for this area, for these areas?
I don't
Or
have
the future land use map, the town's future land use plan for those areas. And I apologize if it's within your memos. I was just sort of looking that up.
I don't have that handy, but we can follow up with that information. That's a good question.
Kirsten, I
But-
will, just in terms of zoning, I do want to note that in the city, the city plan, at least for this neighborhood to the east, I think, identifies this area as like a low scale residential. But I want to note that in the city, low scale residential is still really dense. I think in a lot of places can mean up to like 8 or even 10 units per acre. And so, the city did a really good simplification of its residential zoning districts in the last 2-3 years and got Home Act compliant. And I think, even allows maybe a little bit more in terms of density. But yeah, we're talking somewhere in the vicinity of 8 to 10 units an acre, even in these neighborhoods.
Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, I don't think you need to follow up and provide more information for me as one board member. Just curious what the opportunities for redevelopment of some of these predominantly residential lots into something more, even though there are, as you indicate, Taylor already has a relatively high density. I'm a little familiar. I mean, some of them are so like the 50s, it's highly walkable. So yeah, I think it does make it more cohesive, and it's I'm fine with including it. But hopefully as the area continues to grow, it would also have opportunity for even higher density.
And I just want to say, I would be very deferential to what South Burlington is most interested in terms of their designated downtown, not designated, sorry, their downtown center future land use area. Just because we made an advisory recommendation that you might consider expanding what was initially presented doesn't mean that it needs to be expanded. If the city is more comfortable with what they originally proposed, our input was it meets the requirements. So it's really up to them and you to decide whether to add these areas, and I'd be supportive of it, but it's not necessary either. It's if they don't feel it's worth doing.
I agree.
Thank you.
That's what we needed to hear.
I'm seeing a variety of head nods.
I believe that's all we have for you. We really appreciate this conversation. We know that we are all kind of feeling our way through this part of the pre-application process, and I feel like this has been very constructive. You've been generous with your thinking. We know you haven't made any guarantees for us, but you have asked more good questions and provided us with, as I keep calling it, a weather report. So if you have follow-up thoughts, or if there's anything you want to do to bring this conversation to a close, other than our leaving this meeting, please let us know. Maybe we'll follow up with Sarah later this week just to make sure we're buttoning things up properly, given that this is the first time we've done this together. So thank you.
Thank you, because this is the first time that we've done this with an RPC. So thank you for being our guinea pigs on this.
Always.
So absolutely, please take some space to think through where this has landed you. And if we need to schedule you to come back again, I think that's something that we could do. If you could give us a heads up on that by like Wednesday, that would be fantastic. So, all right. Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. See you later.
Sarah, you mean by Wednesday of a given week?
Well, if they wanted to come back Wednesday of next, or they wanted to come back next week, Wednesday of this week would be fantastic. But yeah, so Wednesday of a given week would then put you in for a future week. Yes. So,
Given the timeline we're on, it'll be Wednesday this week.
all right.
If at all. Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right. I will come back to, just before we move on to road rule, we do have public that have joined us, an opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. Annette, you were kind enough to join us. Do you have anything that you wish to say? And I'll give you a minute to come off of mute.
I do not have any comments at this time. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. We'll move on to road construction jurisdiction guidelines. Brooke, would you want to take a crack at this and I can jump in?
Well, I'd like to share my screen because, before I do so, let me just say that as we had a little shifting of what folks are working on the board, So I have jumped in to try to give some time and effort to the road construction jurisdiction. We need to be responsive because we are fielding questions now about the applicability and how to determine a way in which to document existing roads on folks' property, et cetera. So to begin with, I just want to say that to remind everybody, the board has endorsed a delay in the deadlines for the effective date of the road construction jurisdiction. Right now, it presently is July 1st of this year. And we have, there were deadlines that were being altered that we asked, or that were being proposed to be altered. We weighed in, we agreed, and supported an alignment of our various tasks, Tier 3, Criterion 8C, road rule, road construction jurisdiction, et cetera. So in trying to provide guidance in case that deadline does not get altered, it's very important that we continue to march forward to try to provide that kind of guidance so that our district coordinators can adequately be consistent in their interpretation of the new statute and giving advice to folks that are calling. So if I can share my screen, I'm going to show you a road and driveway memo that I drafted over the weekend. We will post it later on, but for conversation purposes, we have taken a little bit different tact and looked at the definitions and tried to figure out a very simple way of trying to distinguish between driveways and roads, so that we can find a way to implement this that is clear and a bright line to the extent possible. And of course, everything is context dependent and is really, a set of facts that needs to be analyzed and determined. But we need to figure out some rules and how to apply them to begin with. So this is for discussion purposes. This may be a great idea. It may be a terrible idea. So we are putting it forth for discussion purposes to try to figure out if this makes sense and whether or not this would work to implement road construction jurisdiction presently. So in this memo, I've just laid out the statutory language just so that we can refer back to that if necessary. But I'm just going to go directly to the definitions that are proposed for discussion. This is not a baked cake. I just want to be very clear about that. So the simple idea behind these definitions is that a road, which is defined within the statute for road construction jurisdiction, but we're also saying it also means a constructed way that provides vehicular access to a tract of land owned by a person. So it's like an easement. If you think of it in that sort of in that conceptual way, it's an access way, a road, an easement, a right of way that gets you to your property. So because the statute, I will remind you, talks about the construction of a road or roads and any associated driveways to provide access to or within a tract of land. So what I am suggesting for discussion is, all right, to get to the land, it's called a road and it's defined as a road. But then in terms of access within the tract of land, once you cross the boundary of the tract, where now I own it and I'm not dependent on an easement or a right of way to get there, then the definition of what I build on my own land is a driveway. It's literally that simple. So I get 2,000 feet of building driveways on my tract of land minus whatever road that I built to get there. assuming that that was not the full 800 feet. If the road that I built to get to my property was 800 feet, that is triggering jurisdiction. So because we have two thresholds, we have 800 feet of road, we have 2,000 feet of combined road and driveways. So that's the original premise of simplicity for how one could define whether or not it's a road or a driveway to make that distinction. Now, this sort of, in a sense, is mimicking the notion of ownership and leaseholds and all that, but we were trying to boil it down to something that's much easier to implement. That would be a very clear, simple, bright line.
So I
I'm gonna
will say a couple
throw
of
it out
things.
for discussion.
Is I very much appreciate, Kirsten and I had tag teamed on this before, and we're working off of Aaron Brondike had given us some great information to work with. And I think the perspective that Brooke brought to this was to try and simplify it. And so I think where we're trying to simplify it is particularly making a road is how you get there, and then a driveway is inside of it, and putting aside some of the ownership issues, which there can be a variety of. And, I think that we will have to continue to sketch this out. But I like the idea of trying to head in this direction and make things as simple as possible. We had revisited this, I think, back in January, we started with this. And it was a bit more complex. It might be once we get through legal with this, we have not gone through legal with it. It might get a little bit more complex. Thomas Weiss was kind enough to provide some comments to Brooke and I too that we'll look into. But we wanted to first sort of take a temperature of the board before continuing on with this. Alex.
So not criticizing, just trying to understand at first. I'll criticize later. These seem like very, like you said, very simple definitions of what is a road, what is a driveway. Can an access be both under these definitions? The example I'm thinking of is an access that passes through a property. Think of like a 3-lot subdivision. There's a road that comes off of a town road that serves, 3 lots. And it passes through the first lot to get to the second lot, right? And then passes through the second lot to get to the third lot where it terminates. The portion that's within the first lot that is serving the first lot, but is also serving the second lot you would think would be a road. But under this definition, it seems to indicate that it's a constructed way that provides vehicular access within a tract of land. It's within lot 1. It's providing access to lot 1. It's also providing access to lot 2, which is beyond it. But is it both a road and a driveway under these definitions in that instance?
I think we're trying to avoid it being defined as two different things. And I think it would be dependent on when and who is building it. So if it is a subdivision by a developer, then it's not about, the individual lots, the whole tract of land that he's subdividing and creating, these access ways and maybe, doing the building envelope or whatever. That whole shebang on his tract of land would be 2,000 feet minus whatever it took to get to the tract. So it's about what's being built after the deadline and so if he builds 400 feet to get to the tract of land and then ends up building 1,700 feet of driveway, access roads, shared driveways, whatever you call it, vehicular access roads kind of thing, roadways. All of those are going to be considered driveways, which is about what is the amount of footage you get to build. That's what basically it's coming down to. On a tract of land, you get 2,000 feet minus whatever it took to get there. So if let's take a different example. Let's say, you know, I build 1,900 feet of roads and or driveways, and I haven't triggered under road solely. So somebody says they want to connect to my road. So if they connect to my roadways, they have to start counting. Okay, so their road gets built and maybe it's 100 feet to get to their property boundary, and then they build their driveways. So they have to figure out what that number is. Now, then you have to look back at when the roads were built, and if the other roads on that tract were built after the July 1st, at this point is the date, then you have to add that segment that is being built at that time onto what already existed that was built after July 1st, even though it was sub-jurisdictional because it wasn't long enough. But
I understand that, Brooke, but I just want to go back to because I have to conceptualize it. So let's make my example even simpler. It's a tract of land. It's 20 acres. That's the tract. It's undeveloped. It's a 20-acre tract. It has frontage on a town road. And so the person, the owner, the developer, whatever, says, I want to cut that tract of land in two. And in order to access the two building lots, I'm going to build a 900-foot road into the tract. Isn't that jurisdictional? It almost sounds like it's within the tract. Therefore, it's a driveway, even though it's serving two homes.
So
Which is it in that case?
Let me tackle that. So this is one of the ones I sketched out. And so where it diverges to the second lot. So let's say you have a straight shot coming in, and then it veers off to the first lot. And there's a driveway coming from that shared access. That's a driveway then to the first lot. And where it veers off into the second lot that's now a road. So they've built a road.
No, because we're going off of tracts, and that's, you know, and within Act 250, like if I have 3 lots, but it's a tract of land, and that's why I have that language in there, owned by a person, because, you know, I could have a number of lots, but they're all one tract of land, and Kirsten can jump in here and correct me if I'm incorrect in what I'm describing. So that whole tract of land that they have, they get 2,000 feet, whether it's driveways to one lot or another lot or 10 lots. At some point, if they get past the 2,000 mark for driveways on that big tract of land, boom. You don't get like each lot gets 2,000. It's the entire tract.
Right. So that's what I was trying to suss out. It sounds like in my example, a 20-acre lot, that's the tract of land. You put a 900-foot road in to access 2 building sites. It's not a road under this definition. It's a driveway, and it doesn't trigger Act 250 because it's not over 2,000 feet, right?
So long as that's all on that tract. Yep.
Right. And your point is, my example was 2 building lots being accessed by a 900-foot access, and that doesn't trigger. If it were 20 lots, granted 20 would trigger anyway. Sorry. If it were 5 lots, still with a 900-foot access, it still wouldn't trigger, as long as the sum total of that access and the various driveways off of it didn't exceed 2,000. Am I reading you right, Brooke?
Right, but absent other jurisdictional triggers of subdivision.
Right. So if that's the case, and then I'll turn it over to Kirsten, I don't like it because I don't think that's consistent with the statutory language or intent, which was to say if you're building a road of more than 800 feet, regardless of whether that road is serving 2 homes or lots or 7 homes or lots, it should trigger Act 250 review. And the 2,000 feet was reserved for road and driveway, but the road trigger is 800 feet. So I'll just leave it at that. And Kirsten can maybe clarify and add more.
Well, I was just gonna say, this is conceptually very similar, I think, to the prior conceptual definitions of roads and driveways that were based on one owner is a driveway, more than one owner is a road, because a tract is everything under control. So it's, we're sort of at a similar place. But the thing that I'm trying to decipher is, and I like that it's been retained as to like not a rec trail, a road's not a driveway, and vice versa. There's a lot of like logic the way this has been structured, but I'm trying to decipher how this will play out across the landscape with when I think about the purpose of this statute. And Brooke and I had a chance to connect a little bit this morning, and I'll just kind of talk through my understanding of how it's envisioned that this would work. So someone has whatever, 20 acres, and just set the subdivision piece aside for a moment. And they put in 1,500 feet of driveway to serve, let's just say 1 or 2 houses, and that's sub-jurisdictional. And then their neighbor has vacant land, and their neighbor says, hey, I'd like to hook on to that, that road you've got, or driveway, or whatever you want to call it. And so the neighbor, works out that they can construct a road or driveway across, call it tract number 1, person number 1, the original 20-acre tract. And so they take action on that first tract, and they construct a 400-foot segment of, call it for now, we're not going to call it a road or driveway, we'll just call it the traveled way. And that brings them to the shared property line. And that's, it's less than 800 feet if looked at individually. It's less than the cumulative 2,000 if looked at individually with respect to person number 1. So it's still sub-jurisdictional. So then what happens when they get, and so I think the way this is worded, that 400-foot segment would qualify as a road because it's being built on one tract to the second tract. So now it's the 1,500-foot driveway, the 400-foot thing off the end of it to the shared property line. Now that's a road. Then what happens to it? Now you're on person number 2's land, and they're starting to build more, right? Because their house isn't right at the property line or whatever they're building. This additional construction on parcel number 2, as I understand it from Brooke, I can jump in here, but I think the idea would be that now you sort of get reset, and now that's again gets to be a driveway because you're back on, the individual tract owned, and you haven't triggered. And so now you do the accounting over again, and you can do up to 2,000 feet of an individual, traveled way throughout the next property. And so on. So am I understanding the proposal as far as how you interpret it would be implemented?
Yes, absolutely.
Or
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Let me also add to my sort of query here and just kind of like thinking about how this would work. Let's pretend person number 2 had to build 900 feet of road to reach the shared property line. And so now that's a jurisdictional road. It's more than 800 feet of road. Now you reach the shared property line, and you're now on person number 2's tract. What happens then? Like, does it then become non-jurisdictional? And does it become a driveway? Like what? I'm just trying to understand how you envision this would work. Oh, and we sort of conceptually, like in the first example of it's 400 feet, it's sub-jurisdictional. It sort of has the feel of like driveway, road, driveway. Like you've got this linear thing going across the landscape that has these different statuses as it moves along. So
Yeah.
can you add to this explanation or help understand how it would work? Help
Yeah,
me understand how.
Yeah, what you've described is correct. I mean, look, I'm not saying this is the right way. We're trying to work through this. How would it work if we use these kind of definitions? And the way that it sounds like it would work is everybody gets their own 800 or 2,000 feet. That would be a premise to understand. And so if I'm living next to Kirsten and I decide I want to hook onto her driveway network that's maybe 1,900 feet long, I start building, and there are three ways I can trigger jurisdiction. I can add on to that tract of land roads that were built after the deadline, and if we go past 2,000 feet, then that triggers it, because that's 2,000 feet on a tract of land of new road building after a certain date. The second way you could trigger jurisdiction is I could be building more than 800 feet of road to access my other tract over Kirsten's property, and that would be a road triggered jurisdiction and anything beyond it. And the third way that I could trigger jurisdiction is I do 700 feet of road, but then I cross the boundary onto my own tract, and I do the balance of driveway building beyond the 2,000 feet.
So in other words,
So-
if you're building, so Brooke, if you're building stuff on my land, then that stuff counts towards your tally.
It does, but it can also count towards your tally on how many roads or driveways are built on your property after that deadline. What new roadway building, I'll call it that, to encompass any kind of road building, driveway building. Because the language of the statute talks about, that look back and computation based on all road building on that tract of land after a certain date. So that's why I say maybe you were very clever, Kirsten, and you only, and by the way, I don't say this in any way to say that avoiding Act 250 jurisdiction, that is not a bad thing. It is perfectly fine. It is complying with the law. So I want to be sure that my comments are not in any way interpreted like I think there's nefarious road building or that somebody's gaming the system by staying under the jurisdictional thresholds. That's totally appropriate. So, but moving on from that, if Kirsten gives me the authority to build a road that ends up triggering jurisdiction of the road building that has happened on her tract, then it's jurisdictional. All of it. Right? Let's look back at the statute.
I'll let Alex go.
Let's let Brooke pull up the statute though.
Sure. All right, so jurisdiction under this subdivision, this is in Roman numeral 1. Jurisdiction under this subdivision shall not apply unless the length of any single road is greater than 800 feet, or the length of all roads and any associated driveways in combination is greater than 200 feet.
2,000.
2,000 feet, sorry. Where is it? Hold on.
It's in the paragraph above.
Okay. Well, actually just jump down to 3. Yeah, it is generally up there, but in Roman numeral 3, for the purpose of determining the length of any road and associated driveways, the length of all other roads and driveways within the tract of land constructed after the deadline shall be included. So that's why I believe under this planned definition thing, if you know, if Kirsten built her roads after July 1st, but it wasn't jurisdictional, then I added on later, and then we hit the jurisdiction on her tract, then she's under jurisdiction. All her roads are under jurisdiction or driveways. So that's why I think that first basis would trigger jurisdiction. Secondarily, if the road itself that I'm building is more than 800 feet, and third is all of my building if it's over 2,000 feet, including my driveways on my land, assuming that the road itself was not 800 feet.
All right, Alex.
So we seem to be talking a lot about what happens when one person builds some road and then the neighbor says at the later date that they want to connect onto that road to service their development on their property. I want to go back to just the simple situation of a single parcel. No neighbors, just one parcel, and a road is being built or a driveway. And when should jurisdiction trigger based on this road rule, statutory construction? It seems odd to me that somebody could build a 1,900-foot access to serve 10 houses and have it not be called a road. To say it was the parcel that we started with, it's interior to the parcel, it comes right off the frontage that's on a town road, and therefore the 800-foot rule does not apply. It's the 2,000-foot rule, and that 1,900-foot access that provides access to 10 homes is a driveway, and therefore doesn't trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. I know that 10 lots or houses would trigger for another reason, but just, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, if somebody builds a single house at the end of a 1,900-foot driveway, that feels like a driveway and meets the intent of the statutory construction. But 10 houses served by that same access, no one in their right mind would call that a driveway. That's a road. So why wouldn't it trigger the road rule because it's more than 800 feet?
We are using these definitions to redefine a normal term in a totally different way, just for the purposes of counting the linear footage of a constructed way. That's the answer. You're totally right. This is a different way of looking at this.
It just seems like we would be introducing a giant loophole into what the legislative intent, which was to say, hey, if you're just a house, if it's just a driveway, you're going to have minor impacts. And so we're going to have the trigger be much longer, 2,000 feet. But if you're a road, you're serving more, you're going to have more impact. So we're going to put the trigger smaller at 800 feet. And this interpretation would seem to say pretty much any access into a property is a driveway. And so it just automatically is 2,000 feet. That's where the trigger is. 800 feet just never applies in that most simple of examples, which is the bulk, I think, of development in rural Vermont, especially. You know, I've got 20 acres. I want to do something with it. I don't need my neighbor's land. My neighbor doesn't care about my road or access. It's just me.
So I think, Alex, just to speak to that, is anything that we do is going to create a loophole of some type. I think that that's one of the challenges here is we've been given this to define. I think the previous definition created some ambiguity around ownership. So if it was a different entity, then it would then trigger. And that gets to be tougher in terms of, well, when are things really a different entity? And we tried to go down the rabbit hole of like leaseholder and things of that nature. But to your point is, if that 10 units is a hotel, that could be potentially a driveway. I think the other thing too that's important to know is we didn't want to go down the route of defining like structurally, like a road is 24 feet wide or something of that nature. Different road standards in different communities. A road in one community could be a driveway in another and vice versa. So whatever we do, there's going to be a loophole. I think the idea that we have and we're trying to strive towards is some sort of idea of clustering, no matter, and trying to keep things within a parcel clustered together and some benefits for it. So I would agree that this is imperfect, but I think the underlying trying to cluster things is still there. I think one of the other things that we drew was where everybody can have a 700-foot road right next to each other to avoid this 2,000-foot venture, right? And so you could have different tracts of land right next to each other. Each one has like a 799-foot road going into it. So I hear you. I'm just not sure that there's a better way, and also keeping it simple and not complicated. But Kirsten, I know you've continued to have your head wrapped around this. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I just wanted to comment on Alex's example, and I hear you too, Alex. But just to note that the example of, oh, someone can put in a 1,900-foot road to 10 homes and not trigger, I don't think that's conceptually quite accurate, because the statute prescribes that roads and associated driveways up to 2,000. So unless those individual home driveways were super short, I mean, for your typical, 10 lot subdivision, they're going to have some length to them. And so, and I was going to make the point that Sarah just made. I've been thinking about this probably way too much, but it does incentivize clustering and shared use of driveways when on a tract people contemplate, multiple dwellings or maybe residential subdivisions or uses that have an opportunity to share segments of driveways. So it really does, I think, incentivize that. And that is part of the, the purpose of this statute too. So I think that's kind of on the plus side. The other thing, to respond a little bit to what I think I heard Brooke just say, but just to spell out how I would interpret this working, is if someone builds 1,000 feet of, call it, driveway, and 5 years later on the same tract, they build another, let's just say for argument's sake, 1,500 feet of driveway, and that later construction puts the tract over the threshold, I don't think Act 250 is going to step in and say, oh, hey, guess what? You need a permit for that first 1,000-foot segment. It's like, no, we don't, like, we wouldn't retroactively assert jurisdiction over something that we did not have jurisdiction over. So it would just be that later segment that went beyond the jurisdictional threshold, and the use that it was serving that would come under jurisdiction on that particular tract. Brooke, you're shaking your head. You don't see it that way necessarily?
I think we need our lawyers to help us with that one, because I think once it's jurisdictional, once it's triggered, I think the road itself is, I mean, what are you going to do? It's already built. But I think technically it would be under jurisdiction, but I'll leave that to our folks to figure out the nuance on it.
Yeah, and just to also mention, like, we've been talking about the definitions for road and driveway. Your memo includes these other things that are kind of substantive topics in of themselves.
Yeah,
So,
and Sarah, how about if I just kind of try to cover those a little bit? Okay. I'm trying to keep mindful of the time though. Do you feel okay with us continuing for another maybe 10 minutes?
So we were supposed to have an hour on this subject and we started late, so I'm absolutely fine with that if others are. All right, proceed.
Okay, great. So the other thing that we were looking at, well, there are two other main areas that we were looking at. One is this, so there are three kinds of roads that the statute talks about. There's new roads that are being built. There's that notion if a non-municipality is improving, not maintaining or repairing a class 4 road, that, that would be jurisdictional as well, as long as I said that the right way, improving, not maintaining. And then the third kinds of jurisdiction that they talked about for roads is a conversion of a road that was used for farming or forestry purposes that also meets the requirements of this subdivision. So I thought to myself, all right, we have some language in the statute that talks about maintenance and repairs to try to isolate that from what an improvement would be to a class 4 road. So that information is already statutorily defined in terms of the class 4 situation. So I thought maybe not. I don't know if we need these definitions, but along with the notion of conversion of a farm or forestry road, we perhaps need to think about what conversion is and whether or not to use those sort of notions of improvements versus maintenance or repairs to also determine, is that part of conversion of a road? So what I'm talking about is the notion of a farm or forestry road is that it's used primarily for that activity. That's probably pretty easy on a farm to figure out at times, and perhaps even a forestry road. But the question becomes, how would we define conversion? What is meant by conversion of a road? Is it just a change of use from it being primarily used as a farm or forestry road, and now you're using it for an additional use? Or does jurisdiction or conversion of a road mean that you need to also do construction of improvements? Because that's the definition of development. So in the first instance, we need to figure out if the terminology conversion of a road means change of use, that it's no longer being primarily used, or do we not even worry about that and look at conversion of a road being change of use and physical action to improve that roadway?
So, and the thing that I'll know is I think Brooke and I are looking at this a little bit differently. I think where I'm looking at it is the conversion itself. It happens when you're no longer using that road for farm and forestry. There's something else that's entering into it. Subdivision of a house, something else enters the picture, and that's the conversion. Conversion does not trigger jurisdiction. It's after that road is converted that then additional length that's created off of it then is meant to trigger jurisdiction. So I think it's a different way that I was looking at it in terms of the conversion in itself does not trigger jurisdiction. So two different ways of sort of looking at this.
And before we go to Kirsten, I think that that's a very valid interpretation, because the language in the statute is conversion of a road used for farming or forestry purposes. That also meets the requirements of this subdivision, which is the construction of roads and any associated driveways to provide access to or within. You have to go back and realize, okay, and are we doing that for 800 or 2,000 feet? So I think what she's saying makes a lot of sense. Conversion of a road may mean, okay, it's no longer primarily used and no longer a farm or forestry road. But then there's a different inquiry, which does it now comply with this section? And that is what makes it jurisdictional. So I think it's a very valid approach.
All right, Kirsten.
I'm a bit confused by part of what I just heard you say, Sarah, so maybe you can help me understand a little bit. So with reference to the statutory language that Brooke just touched on as well, so paragraph 5 concerning conversions says, it's the conversion of a road that also meets the requirements of the subdivision. So just so I'm clear, were you indicating that conversion to a use other than primarily farming or logging forestry, would that jurisdiction would over a road or driveway would only occur if there's an extension to that road that would otherwise meet the requirements? Or are you describing that if certain work beyond maintenance to that previously farming, logging, forestry road would be the thing that's considered for purpose of accounting the length? Because
So there are
to-
actually
to
three
me, this-
questions. There are three questions I just heard you pose. So let me take those one at a time. The
Okay,
first part is the way that I'm reading that sentence that Brooke has highlighted, the conversion of a road for farming and forestry purposes. The conversion does not meet jurisdiction. It's that second part that kicks in, which is the requirements of the subdivision, which if you go up at top, talks to the more than 800 feet of road, more than 2,000 feet of combined driveway and road. So to answer the first question is, yes, I'm saying that the conversion by itself does not trigger jurisdiction. It's the conversion with that other piece. Now that's the two other questions I heard. The first one is, are you saying that improvements count towards the 800, the 2000? And I'm arguing and saying, no, I don't think that they do. I think that it's the same standard that you use for other roads and driveways, which is sort of like that third part of your question, which is it's the conversion and construction of additional length of road or driveway that then triggers it.
Hmm. So I don't read this highlighted paragraph in the same way that you do. I interpret it to mean that you have to have two things together, a conversion and meeting the requirements of the subdivision, which have to do with length of roads and driveways. And I think that it's explicitly referring to a road used for farming or forestry purposes. So I don't know how you would not count for that length of road that's being converted to a different use in the analysis of, you know, how much length gets added up.
Because we're still requiring a physical action on the land. We're not saying there's an existing farm road and poof, now all of a sudden, since it's, 900 feet long and it's no longer being used for farming, poof, now it's jurisdiction. No, it requires that change of use to
Well,
something else.
I understand that there has to be work on the road beyond just maintenance, under the, the interpretation here, but what I'm hearing you say is that if there's that kind of work done to the existing farming or forestry purpose road, that doesn't count, that it would be only the extension of that road, for which one would add up the length to determine
That's
if
something-
jurisdiction is
yeah.
triggered. That's not how I read this paragraph myself.
Well, that's
So I
how,
think
that's
if you
what
were-
we have to figure out, okay?
Yeah.
Is, so let me just go back down, if you don't mind, Sarah, let me just, because I want to
Sure.
make this point. So, conversion, the question is, A, use as well as then some physical action on the land that's construction of improvements, all right, that triggers Act 250. So those two things have to be present in the way that I think, no matter how you interpret it, I think those two things have to be present. Now, the next question that you're asking is, so does the existing road, does that linear feet, is that like all of a sudden part of it? Or if not, if you improve that road or work on that road, does it trigger jurisdiction? Or is it only if you add onto the road what your linear feet that you're actually constructing? We have to decide that. Now, the fact that I put improvements and maintenance and repairs, I just threw these in here to show what a consistent definition would be, for example, versus what the statute has articulated for class 4 improvements by a non-municipality. I simply put them in here for discussion purposes. And I think there's a whole issue. I think people have difference of opinion about paving, for example. And I don't even know that we should be defining improvements. The only thing that the statute defined were the maintenance or routine repairs, that kind of thing.
So I'd
So
like to go
this
to
is
Alex.
discussion fodder, that's all.
Right, I'd like to go to Alex, but I think the point that I just want to make before we move on is what I was saying is if you define improvements and say that they count towards the 800 feet or 2,000 feet, is then it needs to be cross board. It needs to not only be farm and forestry roads, it needs to be all roads. And I don't think that's something that we've contemplated or wanted to, sorry, the pun, go down that road. I don't think that we can treat them separately. So I think that what we had proposed in the first part of the conversation was sort of a very clean length driven jurisdictional versus this sort of potentially introduces a new element. But Alex, you've been very patient, so let's hear what you have.
So 2 points. I agree with Kirsten on the first point that I think that the intent was you have a logging trace, right? It's barely, it's just an access that somebody uses to get up into the back 40 acres where they do logging, right? That's a forestry road. And I think the legislative intent was, you want to build another one of those someplace, that doesn't trigger this road rule. But you have an existing one that's been there for 20 years and you use it every 10 years to do timber stand improvements, and you now want to convert that into a real road to serve non-forestry development. If you're touching more than 800 feet of that road to improve it to the point where you can use it for something other than forestry, it should trigger. So I wouldn't agree with, like, you have that existing forestry, trace, and you have to add 800 feet on the end of it to have it trigger. I think if you're improving 800 feet of it, it should trigger. It's being converted and you're doing construction, right? You're improving that road and you're constructing more than 800 feet. Even if it's in the existing footprint of that forestry trace. So I'm with Kirsten on that one. As far as the improvement definition, yikes. I think, again, it's not just a change of size to that forestry road or farm road. It's the construction of it. Are you doing construction in that forestry road? Like, you're converting it, and then are you doing construction? So it's not just that you're widening it, or you're adding pavement. What if somebody didn't do any of those things? What if they simply used exactly the width that was there, but they dug it out, they laid down all sorts of base, put down filter fabric, and then dressed it up with gravel at the top and turned it into a bona fide road? I think that's what the legislation was intending us to cover with the conversion of these farm and forestry roads. Not just that they got wider or that they got extended longer, but they were converted and construction was happening to turn them into a road or driveway, depending on the length.
Yeah, that's why, and again, this is sort of theoretical. Did we even want a definition? But that's why I use the material change language, which is the Act 250 standard in terms of amendment jurisdiction. For example, has there been a material change over to a pre-existing non-jurisdictional development? The only thing that I did is I just lifted the language from the class 4 section of the statute. Because, and this, which talks about the adding of pavement to the class 4 road, which apparently is an improvement, because it's in the category of this is not maintenance or repair. And I don't know that we necessarily all agree that pavement is a material change, but all I was doing was mimicking what's in the statute about class 4 roads as some sort of starting point, if we want this kind of definition at all. I tend to agree. I mean, look, Act 250 jurisdiction can be triggered by a material change. And so that's why I thought it was significant to tie into that. I think if you are doing a material change to a converted road, it's called out in the statute. I think that there is a rational basis for that, but I also do appreciate the other side of the coin.
Kirsten,
So I think that we perhaps don't need a definition of improvements. I mean, this is sort of one of the fundamental building blocks of Act 250, construction of improvements for commercial purpose. And I don't think that we necessarily need to have that defined here. I think if we have, and the statute already provides some information about routine maintenance for purposes of, at least for purpose of class 4, and there's a lot of precedent. So it doesn't hurt to have a definition of maintenance and to say, you know, work on a converted road and excessive maintenance, repair, routine maintenance. I guess in terms of it, back to the conversion piece, just in my mind, I mean, if it was going to work the way that others are contemplating here, then you wouldn't even need to address conversions. Like it would just be that they would all, like they would be treated like other existing roads, but they are called out differently in the statute. Forest farming and forestry purpose roads. So, yeah.
so if I can summarize, I think what I'm hearing from the other board members at this point is that conversion of a farm and forestry road to be jurisdictional also includes some non-maintenance. We don't need to define improvements, but non-maintenance to that farm and forestry road, as well as serving something other than farm and forestry. So I'm getting a head nod from Kirsten.
That sounds,
Alex?
conceptually, that sounds right to me.
Yeah, I think we're confusing, you know, what what conversion of a farm and forestry road is. Like like you said, Sarah, it's a two-step process. You have to convert it to a non-forest or farm use, and then you have to do construction. And I think once you've converted it to a non-farm or forestry use, I would like to be a little more strict about what is construction, right? It's a length, and then it's pretty much anything you're doing in that roadway. Like, I don't want to say, well, you're no longer using it for your farm, you're using it for a residential development, but all you did was some maintenance on it. And you did that maintenance, you know, over 1,000 feet, but it was just maintenance. And so you don't trigger Act 250. I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent was you've converted it, you're doing construction, you're in. And all this maintenance business is important for existing real roads and for class 4 roads, but not for farm and forest roads. I mean, these these could be anything from a very well-defined, you know, gravel road that can hold a heavy logging truck, to a 2-track that goes into the back 40 that nobody's been on for 25 years, but you know, is a feature on the landscape and is used every once in a while.
Brooke.
So this kind of gets us into the conversation about existing roads, and which we are not in any way trying to assert jurisdiction over, because I don't believe we have that jurisdiction in the statute. Because, you know, what is a road? that exists on whatever the deadline ends up being. And we are getting questions about how do I, provide information so that the Land Use Review Board or Act 250 has information and I can establish that my roads actually exist. And so in conversations about this, we've been contemplating, how do you define whether or not a road exists? What kind of condition does it have to be in order to qualify as an existing road that is not under any kind of jurisdiction because it exists on that deadline date? So we have come up with the notion of being able to traverse it in a, what did we use for language, Sarah? Like a pleasure car, a normal vehicle for normal vehicular access of a passenger car. So that way we don't have to have enforcement people or district coordinators go out and try to figure out what kind of condition was this in. It existed and you could drive on it. And maybe that's good enough. And these are very blunt definitions and tools and everything, but you have to remember that we're trying to make sure that we logistically can implement this in a simple process that does not require processing great volumes of information and looking up, maps and all these other things. So it's an idea, but that's the standard we were discussing.
Kirsten,
I'd have to think about that. I mean, it's simple, but I think, yeah, I like, there's lots of different types of vehicles, and I mean, I think for a road or driveway to exist, usually there's some kind of physical improvement that has occurred. There's some usually scraping off topsoil or some amount of graveling, and to make it support some level of use beyond just drive a car over it. I mean, people, in some geographies and settings, you can drive a car over a lot. Like I just think maybe that's a factor, but I guess I'd want to think about that. I like simple, but I can also see that opening up its own kind of, I don't want to say can of worms, but
But Brooke, this draft doesn't have that language in it, right? You didn't give us that in the document. A definition of what an
Right,
existing road
yeah.
is, or guidance
Yeah.
on what an existing road is.
Yeah, we have,
Yeah.
I've been working on redrafting the guidance document, which also includes like how to determine, what roads existed before and that kind of thing. So I just didn't think it was necessary to bring everything in front of you because these are some pretty big decisions we got to make to begin with, and we can refine the other stuff. But once you brought that up, I wanted, it's all sort of connected.
Gotcha.
so
Kirsten.
can I bring up another mention about modifications to farming or forestry purpose roads, and getting back to some of what Alex just mentioned? If the analysis is based in part on, physical action on existing farm and forestry roads, like as part of the whether or not they've been converted and meet the requirements of section 12, then in terms of adding up feet, right, 800, 2000, I can anticipate that there would be some people who would make the case that they could have, here's this 4,000 foot, whatever, farm or forestry road, and I'm going to do work on this 300 foot segment, and then the next 800 feet looks pretty good, and now there's a wet spot. I'm going to do work on that 100 foot section, and the total individual but non-contiguous segments add up to something less than the 800 or 2,000. And I mean, as one board member, I don't think that was the intent here either, that kind of a methodology would be something that we would do. But I just want to mention it because I think that will come up as a question.
So I'm gonna ask a more probative question. I want to recognize that we're at time. But I'd like people to consider the why in that. Because I think the scenario that Kirsten just described is if there's a pre-existing road or cut into that forestry block, that somebody is contemplating improving different sections, and that's going to trigger Act 250. Somebody else might just say, well, to heck with it, then I'm going to create yet another road and just punch that in. And there's no incentive that's being provided to utilize that existing cut then. And so I think that's sort of like a perverse result that could occur from this. And the idea of trying to incentivize use of these existing roads is something that we perhaps do want to try and do, because that will minimize additional impacts to these interior areas. So I think you've given Brooke and I some good info to chew on. I think we're going to continue to work and refine this, meet with legal. I think we're going to want to have successive weeks where you're going to be sick of road rule by the end of March. And I was joking that welcome to March, which is mud season, and roads are usually messy to begin with. And so here we are plowing right into messy roads for March. So thank you. I don't know, Brooke, did you have anything that you wanted to sort of finish on road
No,
rule?
Yeah, I know this was an unusual approach, but I thought it warranted some thought, and happy to continue. Take pot shots at it, figure out what's wrong with it. What are the shortcomings? Because it may lead to looking at it differently and coming up with a better idea. So
Yeah, I just want to counter a little bit of what I heard Sarah say respectfully. Like, I think that the scenario and the question that I outlined is highly appropriate, and that is how people will be, evaluating how does this analysis work? And those are the kinds of details that are part of what we need to make sure is understood and defined.
Yeah, and I would just say, Sarah, that the legislature clearly did not believe that forestry and farming roads or trails fragmented forest blocks and habitat. And so because of that, I don't think there is a reason to incentivize using them as real roads, to serve other types of development. If somebody wanted to put in a separate road and not use the forestry access, I don't think we're losing anything, because that forestry access may be A, wholly inappropriate due to slopes and drainage, and B, it's not a fragmenting feature of the landscape per the legislature. So we don't really need to make sure people use it as the access. The only parting comment I would make is, again, back to the beginning of like, how do we differentiate road from driveway? I'm happy to talk more offline so I can better understand this access to, access within. But I think it's going to be really hard to explain to Vermonters. And I think we should abandon that approach, and we should go back to something that's much more easily understood. A road serves more than one property or principal structure. A driveway serves one parcel or one principal structure, and leave it at that. I mean, we use that at the municipal level all the time. People get it. It makes sense to them. I don't think this is going to make sense to people. And the idea of having, folks use a right of way across their neighbor's property on the front portion of their road so they can get to the part of their property that they then want to access, and the front portion is considered a road, but the back portion becomes a driveway. It's an awkward construction. I don't really like it.
All right. Well, good discussion nonetheless. We'll continue on, and I appreciate all the different thoughts, and we have an executive session to get to, but Annette.
I, I'll offer one comment on this. I imagine you're aware of some of the public, I won't call it discussion, but uh, reactions that are going on the internet, on social media regarding Act 181. And perhaps the biggest concern that I can point to is, oh my God, I can't build a driveway to my house on my property. It's going to make me go into Act 250. So in terms of what you're doing, I think that's one of the most important things to clarify, because I even heard in one of the legislative committees, one of the senators misused the word driveway when it should have been road. So clarifying that this road rule does not affect a driveway to one person's home, I think is going to be very important. There's a lot out there that I wouldn't even begin to know how to respond to, but that piece is something that is getting legs and is igniting a rural backlash.
Brooke, perhaps a final word to wrap us up?
Yeah, I just want to, and this may sound, highly technical or persnickety, but I would like us to try to not refer to this as the road rule. This is road jurisdiction. The road rule is something from before, and I've already encountered folks that have thought that what the current road jurisdiction trigger is the road rules from before, and they are different. It sounds silly to ask for this, but I think if we just keep calling it road construction jurisdiction as opposed to road rule, it would be good to do that, to try to maintain the differentiation of what used to be the situation.
All right.
Yeah, the
thank
only
you.
problem, Brooke, is that it's called the road rule in Act 181.
Right, but what we're working on, but we need to wrap up, so let's move on. I'd like to have a motion to get us to the next portion of our agenda. Brooke,
Give it a whirl. I don't have it in front of me, but I would move that the board enter into executive session for the purposes of discussing enforcement and litigation matters with our attorneys and receiving attorney-client privileged advice, the premature public knowledge of which would place the board at a substantial disadvantage, and that we make that finding and enter into executive session.
thank
Second,
you. Kirsten, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We're unanimous. We'll head into executive session. We'll come back quickly at the end to report back. So thank you all. We'll see you in a few minutes. All right, Rachel, we're back. All right, I think we're all back and online. So we went into executive session. We discussed a couple legal cases.